Let us talk about baking. Not the kind done in cake shops, but baking textures from a node group, shader, or from a high poly to a low poly model. I'm going to show you how to bake image textures in Blender. Blender allows you to bake textures without any add-ons, but the process can be time consuming, unintuitive, and often requires repeating the same steps multiple times to generate multiple images from different models. To make the process of baking simple, I'll be using an add-on called SimpleBake for Blender. This add-on streamlines the texture baking, making it more efficient and user-friendly. Once installed, this add-on provides a dedicated panel with all the necessary options for baking textures. Let's dive into how to use this add-on, shall we? So this is the add-on tab. I'll put the link for this add-on in the description. This add-on costs $20 for a single user. So once you install this add-on in Blender, you will be greeted with a brand new tab called SimpleBake in the rendering section. Just by a glance, you can see all the various options it has. So I'm going to show you guys how this add-on works by exploring all these various settings in this tab. So the setting presets, here you can create your own presets. So when you start baking, you are going to add objects, you are going to change what materials or what images you want to bake, and how the resolution and all the various settings that you are going to change. So if you have a specific settings which you are going to use repeatedly, you can create your own presets. For example, I'm going to create a preset called test preset, and I'm going to change some settings. So by default, these are the options by default. Diffuse, metalness, only diffuse is turned on and all the others are grayed out. So I'm going to change all this, enable these 5, and under the special bakes I'm going to enable color ID, and in the texture settings I'm going to bump it to 2K. I will explain these settings later, but for now I'm going to change these few settings. Okay, let's assume these are the settings I'm going to use repeatedly again and again. So what I can do is I just have to create a name and I have to press this start button. So now a preset is created. So if I reset everything, as you can see, all the settings are back to normal. Everything is back to normal. So what I can do is to get the preset which I created, all I have to do is go to the settings presets, and I have to click this test preset and I have to press this tick. So this will load all the various settings which I saved as the preset in this test preset. This is a really useful trick if you have a specific settings which you are going to use again and again and again and again. So that's for the settings and presets. And the global preset will be available for all the Blender files, and there is a section called blend file presets. This will available for the specific Blender files only. So next is the bake object section. In this tab you can add all the objects that you are going to bake. So I have 5 objects in the viewport and I can bake all these objects at the same time. So I can either select this object and go and add one by one, or I can select all the objects, and if I press this add, it will load all the selected objects into this bake objects. All the objects which we have here are going to be baked. So the SimpleBake will bake textures for all the objects that is in this objects panel. So next is PBR bakes. Okay, first we have to address there are 2 types of bakes, PBR bakes and cycles bake. PBR bake will have all the general options like diffuse, metalness, roughness, normal transmission, and all this stuff we usually see in Substance Painter or similar texturing apps. And the cycles bake tab will enable you to bake all the texture images for things like light, transmission, diffuse, and indirect. Most of the times we are going to use the PBR bake. So I'm going to go to this PBR bake. I'm going to enable few channels: diffuse, metalness, normal, roughness, and emission strength. And if you have some more options which you want to bake, all you have to do is enable all this. There is a button to select everything and select none. I'm just going to select these 6 options. So, and there is an attempt to auto detect which will see the node shader groups and will try to enable all the necessary options. So if I use this, it will enable transmission and displacement, but right now I'm not going to bake them. And there are some extra options which will be available only if you export the textures. So now I will enable the export options. So come to this export settings. You can export just the images or just mesh, or you can export both of them at the same time. So I'm going to just export images, export bakes, and by default it will save the path where the Blender file is saved. I'm going to leave that in default, and you can create this subfolder per object which will create a different folder for each of these objects. I'm going to leave it off. And this color management setting, so in Blender, if you change any of the color management settings, for example the view transform from AGX to say Chronos or to standard, enabling this button will use this options. Toggling this button will also consider the view transforms and all the other various settings like exposure, gamma from the color management tab. I am going to keep it off because I want the raw color from the shader to be baked. And there's an option to export all the images in 16 bits, which will be useful in some cases for normal maps and displacement. But right now I'm going to turn it off to speed up the process. And that's it for the export settings. There's a tab called special bakes. This will enable you to bake color IDs, vertex color, curvature, thickness. You can just know what are these by reading the names. So if you have a vertex color data in your model, you can bake them, or if you have any specific color ID, you can bake them also. Right now I'm not going to enable any of this because I don't want to bake any of the special bakes. And the next tab is the texture setting tab. So in this tab you will see all the various settings for baking the textures and exporting the textures. So next on to the texture settings tab. So in this tab you will see all the options to bake and export. So in this tab you will see in this tab you can change all the different settings for image resolution and texture resolution for baking and even exporting. So the texture are going to, you have two different sections for baking and output. You can bake at a small resolution and you can export in a higher resolution, or you can bake in a higher resolution and you can export in a small resolution. There is a button to increment them. So right now the default will be 1024. I'm going to increase it to say 2K. You can bump it to 4K or even 8K, but right now I'm going to keep it in 2K so that the baking will be fast. By default both baking width and height will have same values. You can change them individually, but right now I'm going to keep them as same. And every time you change the values for bake at, the values for output at will also reflect. You can change them individually afterwards, but right now I'm going to keep them both at the same, both bake at and output at resolution same. And there is this bake margin. Okay, what is margin? If you don't know what bake margin is, anytime you have a UV map, there is a bake margin. What the bake margin will do is it will bake the image a little outside also. It will stretch all the baked texture information, all the colors a little bit outside. So this will prevent any seams or artifacts around all the seam cuts. I just want to take a quick side trip to ZBrush. I just want to show you guys what will happen if you don't have margins enabled. As you can see, there is a line going on the model everywhere. So those are the lines where I made seam cuts. As you can see, everywhere I made seam cuts, the texture are not going to be baked properly if you don't have margins enabled. So the margins will vary based on the texture size. If you have 1K, 4 or 8 will be fine. But if you have more than 1K, say that if you have 2K texture or 4K texture, I'd suggest you guys to have at least 8 pixel to 16 pixel as margin. You can go up to 32, but 8 to 16 will most of the time work. So to avoid errors like these seam lines in your model, you have to enable the margins option. By default, the bake margin pixel is 8. You can increase it, but I'm going to leave it at default. And you can bake all the information as 32-bit. So this is not going to work for every images. There are only specific images which will support this, and you can bake transparent background. I'm going to turn it off. Say for example, in all these areas you will get a black or a white or a gray color or something like that, a solid color. Make them transparent by enabling this transparent background option. And there is this anti-aliasing options which I'm going to not use. It will try to smooth out the bake results, but it may or may not sometimes create artifacts and may create some blurriness or some sharp transitions. So it's basically better to keep this off in most cases. So export settings, we looked at it. Next is UV settings. Okay, if you have a proper UV like I did, You don't have to change anything. But if you don't have any UV and you have to quickly bake this, you can enable this new UV maps option, which will bake UVs using the Blender's smart UV unwrap algorithm. I don't recommend it. It's not going to give a proper UV or proper seams. So I suggest you guys to create a clean new UV as manually as possible, as cleanly as possible, so that you will get a proper bake results and auto detect UDIMs. So if your model has multiple UDIMs, enabling these options will detect the UDIMs automatically. And if you see this tips available, you can expand it and it will give you a little tip. You can read that to get more info on those specific sections or specific tabs or specific options. So these two buttons will help you choose which UV sets that you want to bake the texture maps to. By default, if you create any model and unwrap UVs, the model will have this UV maps called UV map. This is the default name. But in cases that you have multiple UVs and everything have a different name, say temp and map, the textures will be baked for the UVs whichever is set as active. You can set a UV set active by clicking on this render tab, this camera button. This will make that specific UV as active, or the other option in this tab is prefer existing UVs called SimpleBake. If you have multiple UVs and if you want a specific UV map, you say that I want this to be rendered, this to be active, but I want UVs for this to be baked. All I can do is I can rename it to SimpleBake. This way, even though this UV map is active, the baking is going to be done for this UV. Next to the other settings, and you have this bake name option. What this does is every time you bake an object, it's going to create a batch called bake one. But if you want to create a new batch, all you have to do is you have to come here and change the name to bake batch 2 or bake 2. And when you press the bake button, it's going to bake a new batch with the name called bake 2 without replacing the old batch. And under here you have an image sequence options. This will be helpful if you have any animated textures or something like that. In this model, as you can see, this texture is created in shader and it is an animated texture. So if I want to bake textures for the frame 1 to 25, I can enable this option image sequence and I can specify the frames which I want to bake. And when I press bake, it's going to bake this texture for this frame 1 to 25. It's going to apply the same settings for all these frames, and you'll have a set of images which you can use as a sequence in any rendering software to make it as animator without using all the shaders. The next option is copy objects and apply bakes. So this option will copy all the baked objects into a new one and will remove all this old shader, and will apply a new shader with just the image textures baked. I will show you how this works. I'm just going to turn it on, and if you turn it on, you will have this another option called hide source objects after bake. So what this will do is this will hide the original objects and only keep the duplicates as visible in the viewport. And create GLTO settings. I'm not going to touch these. Apply bakes to original objects. What this will do is it will replace all this complex shader with a new shader with just the image textures. But I'm going to keep it off because I want the image textures to be applied in a new object, so which I enabled earlier, copy objects and apply bakes. The next options are don't force high bit depth and boost sample count for AO and bevel. I will keep them both off as I don't find, as they are not required in most of the cases, and keeping them off will give you better results. And the next option is the rendering device. I'm going to choose GPU as I have a decent GPU, and under here if you open the tip, you can see this option. Other users have reported problems baking with GPU and optics. This is a Blender issue. So as far as I never faced any issues baking from GPU. But if you have any specific issue or if you are facing any issue while baking, you can change it to CPU. This will be a little slow compared to the GPU baking, but it may give you a better result. So I'm going to keep it as GPU. So the next option is channel packing. So how does channel packing works? First, I want to show you guys how the channel packing works. So in any images with color information, it's going to have 3 channels: R, G, and B. And all these individual RGB channels will only have values between black and white. Either it will be black or white or gray. So if you have any channel which uses only black and white values like metal or roughness, You can use the channel packing to pack 3 images into a single image. How does that work? So as I said, let's consider this R as roughness and G as metallic and blue as maybe alpha. These are in individual images, so you can pack all these images into a single image, which will give you an image with RGB values in colors. You can use this channel packed RGB images, and you can split the RGB values to use as separate metallic, roughness and alpha values. I will show how this works. I'm going to use this R as roughness, G as metalness, and B for B I'm going to use emission strength, as I have a emission shader. Yeah, I'm going to use this as emission strength. And for A, for alpha, I'm going to leave it at none, and I'm not going to touch this compression because 15 is because 15 always works fine. And you can change the format here from PNG or TGA. And once you have all these settings, you can create a new preset using this button called add new. So okay, I will change the name to test underscore packed text, and if you press this add new button, it will create a new preset. Say for example, if I change all these settings, and if I want this settings to be applied, all I have to do is click this, and all the settings from this preset will be loaded here. And the next is the utilities tab. Here you can just reset all the settings that we created, or you can reset all the materials, images and objects, and you can find and replace stuff. Either it can be images or objects or materials. So I'm going to close this tab. I only use this tab to reset all the settings most of the time. I suggest you guys to save your files as frequently as possible. So with all this is done, I'm going to come here and I'm going to press bake. This will give you a progress bar and preview of what is baking and how long it's going to take. I forgot to mention about an important setting. On top of this bake button, there is a foreground and background buttons. So what the foreground is going to do is it's going to use more computational power, more CPU and GPU power to make this baking process fast, but in turn it will slow the blender and maybe your whole PC based on your setup. And background will be relatively slow compared to the foreground, but you can use blender and other softwares without much issues. So now the baking is done. As you can see, the SimpleBake created new objects and it assigned new shaders with all the created image. So as you can see, all the textures are baked, and Blender created new objects and assigned a clean shader with all the with all the baked images. So I'm going to show you guys how it looks. So I'm going to first show this sword. As you can see, the diffuse map, metalness. This part don't have any metalness, so it's black. Roughness. This is the emission color. This is the emission strength and normal map. And for the other parts, so this is the diffuse, this is the metal, this is the roughness, emission strength, normal. This did this. Okay. So it created this various different textures for all the models. But as you can see here in this part where the blade is, crystal blade is, it has only one UDIM. But this part where the metal is, it has two UDIMs. Okay, so what is happening? I created this model in a way that it shares the same UV and UDIM space. All this different objects will share the same UDIM space, but they are separated just for organization purposes. I just made them in a way. There is an option in this add-on to bake all the different UVs in a single UV set. Say for example, all these objects, all the UVs in this part, whatever object sharing this UV will bake into a single texture. So how to enable this option? You have to go to this texture settings, and here you can see multiple objects into one set. So what this will do is, again, it will see all these objects and it will see what are the objects sharing the same UV space, and it is going to bake a single image for all these various objects. So I'm going to enable this button. I'm going to quickly bake and show you guys how this works. Now if you guys see, the textures are baked in a single tile. They are different objects, but they are going to share the same shader and same UV sets. As you can see, even though this object's UV is in the first UDIM and it don't have any other UVs, you can see the image has the bake information from other objects. And because these objects are created in a UDIM workflow, You can see all these images sharing a single UV tile but different objects. To use this option of baking multiple objects into a single texture set, you have to make sure that there is no overlapping UVs. As you can see, the UVs share the same UV space, but none of them are overlapping each other. If you have any models or any UVs that overlap each other, you are going to face some issues while baking. And I'll quickly show you guys how the pack textures are looking. So I'm just going to search for pack. So we have two pack textures. Basically they are two UDMs, so but you can't see anything. Okay, what is happening? Remember, when we are packing the textures, we put none in the alpha tab. So because the alpha doesn't have any data or any image information, it's going to show you as this empty image. But if you go to the red or the green or the blue channel, you have all the image data. So what you can do is you can import them. You can import these images and you can split the RGB data using a split RGB node. In this video, we saw how to use the SimpleBake add-on for Blender to bake all the shaders and images into a single texture sets. In the next video, I'll show you guys how to bake a high poly information to a low poly model. I'm going to use a human head to show that. Stay tuned to watch that video. So that's it for this video, guys. Hope this video is helpful. If you like this video and it helped you in any way to learn any new things, press the like button and subscribe to see all my future videos. And share this video to all your friends who are baking in Blender without any add-on. See you guys in the next video. Bye bye.